I've talked about the US-backed anti-government protests here in Thailand, how the US government, through the National Endowment for Democracy, is funding all the core organizations involved, everything from leadership and media promoting the protests to legal services and even organizing petitions to do everything up to and including trying to rewrite the Thai constitution. I've also talked about these Western-backed opposition parties that are hiding right behind these protests. That includes Thanaton's Future Forward, Move Forward, Progressive Movement parties, but also Thaksin Shinawatра's Pheu Thai party. Now, one of the things these protesters are always complaining about is the military's role in Thai politics. They complain about the 2006 coup that ousted Thaksin Shinawatra from power, and they also complain about the 2014 coup, which ousted Thaksin's sister, Yingluck Shinawatra, from power. Now, I've explained in the past why these coups were absolutely necessary, that when a government breaks the law, is trampling human life and the rule of law, when the courts decide against these governments and demand that they step down and they refuse to, if the police are unable to or unwilling to remove them from power, then the next step is to have the military intervene. And of course, they did. Regarding these abuses, especially Thaksin Shinawatra's abuses from 2001 to 2006, a lot of his supporters and even these mobs in the street trying to condemn the military for intervening will try to say that it's just his critics who are making these things up about him. But I've come across a recent interview done by Thai Enquirer, which is opposition media here in Thailand, an interview with Thaksin Shinawatra. It was published on January 5th, 2021. It's over 47 minutes long. It's conducted in English with Thai subtitles. And even though it was supposed to be basically a whitewash of Thaksin's legacy and an excuse for Taksin and Thai Enquirer to complain about the military and monarchy interfering in Thai politics, what it turned out to be was basically a very confusing, convoluted confession by Taksin, because he's trying to distance himself from the things that he's accused of doing, but at the same time he ends up admitting to what he did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you in the interview where he's asked about the 2003 war on drugs, or his disastrous, needlessly heavy-handed policy in the Deep South in Thailand, and a conflict that has now left over 7,000 people dead. And I want you to see for yourself him admit with his own mouth what he was doing. And then I want to show you later in the interview where they're both complaining about the Thai military being able to intervene in Thai politics, as if what Taksin just admitted to isn't exactly why the military needed to intervene and needs to this very day, prevent people like Thaksin Shinawatra from ever getting into power again. So let's just start by watching parts of this interview.
As a businessman, you always use the bluff. You bluff. You are not really, it's not really, not necessarily to be true, but you bluff it a lot. When I announced the policy, I bluffed the drug traffickers. And police, definitely, some, not too many, not many, some of them involved with drug trade. Sometimes they do the cut-off killing themselves to be sure that they are safe. They're not being alleged by the trafficker. So that is in detail that I should do more detail.
So that's Taksin right there saying that he was bluffing when he said he was going to kill the drug dealers in the streets. And then he said it's, police that he wasn't able to manage who actually just did exactly what he told them to do. But if we remember the investigations that took place, there were actual orders by Taksin's administration that told police to go out and do that. So this is him admitting that he said these things, but he's making an excuse as to why he's not responsible for people doing the things that he told them to do.
Yeah, I think, I should do more politics than policing. I think I should engage them with more dialogue than policing.
Here is Thaksin Shinawatra admitting that instead of engaging with the people in the South, he went down there, policing, which means he sent people down there with guns to push the people there around. When you use violence against people who already might not like you, they're going to use violence back. And I want to remind people that before Thaksin Shinawatra took office, there was peace in the Deep South for over 20 years. It was brokered by General Prem, and it endured until he took office. And here he admits that it was his policies, not the Royal Thai Army's policies, that triggered the conflict.
Well, if if the structure of the armies under civilian government is okay, but now it's like a true reporting system.
So here is Thai Enquirer and Taksin complaining about the Thai military being independent and its ability to make decisions on its own and to intervene when it wants to. And they're both agreeing that it would be nice if the military was completely under the control of the government. And in this case, they're talking about wouldn't it have been nice if from 2001 onward, the military was completely under the control of Thaksin Shinawatra. And then I guess we could only imagine how his war on drugs would have went if in addition to the police, he also had the military go out and carry out his bluff, accidentally on purpose, or how his policies in the Deep South would have went if everyone in the military was on board, not just the people he appointed and sent down there himself personally. And I think we could only imagine how little would be left of Thailand at this point today to even argue about this over.
Some people that they hate me even don't know me, never seen me before. They don't know my character. They just read from my opponent.
Why are people in Thailand afraid of Thaksin Shinawatra? Why are Thai conservatives afraid of Thaksin Shinawatra? Really, as if him admitting, that he bluffed, over 2,000 people into their graves over the course of 90 days in 2003 in his botched war on drugs, as if that's not enough of a reason to be afraid of someone like this and want them removed from power, as if his unnecessarily heavy-handed policy in the Deep South and triggering a conflict that has now killed over 7,000 people, as if that's not enough of a reason to be afraid of Thaksin Shinawatra and want him removed from power and kept out of power permanently. And what wasn't even discussed in this interview was things like his sale of SHIN to TEMASEK in Singapore. What he did was he changed the telecommunications laws in Thailand and laws regarding foreign ownership of Thai companies and their ability to buy shares in Thai companies. He changed it in January 2006, and later that month, on the day the law came into effect, his family sold SHIN to TEMASEK. They made billions of Thai baht, tax-free, and in the same time, they were selling telecom infrastructure of Thailand to foreign investors. And it was such a huge deal that even the U.S. Embassy noted it. And this was from a cable published by Wikileaks. It's from January 2006, and it's titled, "Thailand's Deal of the Century, TEMASEK Buys Out PM's SHIN." And they're talking about how it was the largest corporate takeover in Thailand's history. Unprecedented abuse of power, unprecedented corruption, unprecedented sellout of Thai infrastructure. And ultimately, the U.S. Embassy is quite pleased with what Taksin did, which is no surprise. The way they saw it was, hey, this is Taksin normalizing the selling out of Thailand to foreign investors. Could you only imagine if this trend continues and he's able to put together a Thai-U.S. free trade agreement? Then whatever's left of Thailand to sell out, he can sell out to U.S. companies. Wouldn't that be nice? And so there's another reason why people might be afraid of Thaksin Shinawatra and want him removed from power and kept out of power permanently. Just like a common criminal resents the police when they show up and hold them accountable for whatever it is that they did wrong, people like Thaksin Shinawatra and his supporters, like the people there at Thai Enquirer, and even these mobs in the streets today, resent anyone in society, whether it's the military or the courts, that are able to stand up to them and hold them accountable. Just heard Thaksin Shinawatra admit himself that it was his own policies that led to all those deaths during the war on drugs. We heard Thaksin Shinawatra himself admit that it was his policies that created the crisis in the Deep South. It wasn't the King of Thailand, it wasn't King Rama IX, it wasn't the Thai military who did any of that. It was Taksin himself, and he admits it in this most recent interview. So it's actually Thaksin Shinawatra himself who explains best why the military had to remove him from power in 2006, why the military had to remove his sister from power in 2014, and why the military, Thailand's courts, and every other institution in Thailand with the ability to do so needs to keep him and people like him away from the levers of power in Thailand indefinitely into the future. And one other thing, for the Thai Enquirer to just casually interview Thaksin Shinawatra as if he's just an ex-prime minister and not the worst human rights violator in Thailand's history just goes to show you what kind of operation Thai Enquirer is. And this should come as no surprise to anybody, because every step of the way of the current anti-government protests, Thai Enquirer has been there trying to help justify the violence, the criminality, the defamation that have been a daily part of these protests since they began. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing to the channel. It's totally free to do, and it helps the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate that. To everybody that's been helping me in every way, big or small, whether you're just liking and sharing my work, or if you're doing subtitles and translations, I couldn't do it without my audience. I greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you for watching.